Welcome back to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. I'm Aaron Brightman, joined once again by David Anderson. Back on the trail, was unable to do a recap. My first missed rapid reaction after the Oregon game since doing these a few years. Was pretty sick over the last few days, but back at it, and happy to have David here with me. Let's just do a quick little recap of Rutgers' very disappointing performance, 56-10 loss on homecoming against Oregon, which honestly, the score was much better than the game was actually in terms of how close it was. And then obviously heading into a must-win, I would say, against Purdue on the road this Saturday at noon. David, first, why don't you start with just kind of some key takeaways from the Oregon loss?
Sure. I mean, a lot of our listeners probably heard me give the post game as a guest on the night report. So, in short, I mean, when you see a top 10 team come out guns blazing like that, you're not going to win. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't play hard and, just like everything in life, you have to just build and build and build and do the best you can at every stage. And then eventually, things will improve. So again, I'm not saying I'm withholding blame. My main takeaway was when teams have competed with Oregon early, and maybe on the very first drive or two, Rutgers was like this. But not only do you have to play hard, like we saw Rutgers play against Washington, but you got to play like a crazy bat out of hell hard in terms of that. And when I watched, for example, Oregon against Northwestern didn't have the manpower, but they were flying around like we've seen Rutgers teams even as recently as 2 years ago on defense. And that's the only way to give yourself a chance. And I don't think Rutgers did that, but even if they did do that, I just felt like Oregon was gouging them in the ground game with just simple runs. It wasn't like anything too complicated. And Rutgers, even if, maybe their linemen are pretty good, you can't stop them at the first level. The second and third levels got to step up and stop those plays. And that just wasn't happening, obviously, as Oregon was headed toward, and Rutgers may even surrendered like the most or second most yards in school history. So from a defensive standpoint, we're there. And then the main takeaway from offense is that kind of something we've been starting to build momentum is that Rutgers' offensive line is good against equal competition, but when they face these really superior teams, and there's still more on the schedule this year, it's just really hard for them to protect when the other team is able to just pin their ears back and go all out. So Rutgers has to keep team like that off balance by getting yards and setting up thirds and shorts, and sometimes they were able to do that. And when they didn't, Ethan had absolutely no time to do anything. So I'm not absolving him from a bad performance, but it was a team effort on both sides of the ball that contributed to the result that we saw.
Yeah, excellent points. I think what was alarming to most Rutgers fans was just how physically overmatched this team was from the outset, and how non-competitive they were in this game. I mean, this, and I tweeted it during the game, but, it felt like an Ash era, Shea era type performance where, at the end of the first half, I think it was 42-3. And I mean, people got mad at me for saying this, but I made a joke. Schiano should add Dan Lanning to his holiday Christmas card list because he took his foot off the gas in that third quarter. I mean, this very well could have been, that 78-0 type loss to Michigan. And I just thought that the way that the offense struggled to move the ball could not, 750 yards given up to 202. That is has to be a major red flag. And again, no one expected them to win this game. No one expected them to even, I think, have a chance to win in the fourth quarter. But when you come out and to your point, I don't know if it was nerves. I don't know if it's a lack of confidence, but this team does seem mentally beat up in a negative way. And it's going to be a major challenge, I think, to pick this team up. We've seen Schiano and his staff do it before when we kind of doubted that they could, and they have been able to do it. So this is another opportunity. But I think just from both sides of the ball, I mean, we knew the defense was going to be overmatched. But to your point, it wasn't like Oregon was doing anything, tricky or
right.
Strategic that they didn't know was coming. It was much more of they knew what was coming and could do nothing about it. And I think at this point in year 6, and people could scream NIL all they want, and yes, there is a significant difference between those two teams. But again, I think the expectations, you can look at the NIL difference, but you can also look at expectations. Oregon has national championship expectations, and they have that type of funding. Rutgers does not. However, they do have competitive expectations, bowl game expectations, middle of the pack Big Ten expectations. And regardless of who they were playing on Saturday night, on homecoming no less, that was not a team that looked like they were anywhere close to be able to I think there's a range there of, are you fulfilling your own potential? And I think that's my big thing all season is it's not about fulfilling, top tier expectations or a level, because they're not built for that. But are they meeting the potential of what they have talent wise and what they've been the last 2 years? And the answer is very clearly no. And I think that's where you have to move the NIL conversation out of it and bring in coaching and also player performance, because there's a lot of players that are not performing at the level that was expected of them. And you're seeing it all kind of snowball at once, which really kind of, I think, is a good segue now leading into Purdue, because this is a must win. If this is as winnable a game that's remaining on the schedule. And I think that, what this team's mindset and the character of this particular team is going to be on full display on Saturday. Any thoughts leading up to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Purdue is in a lot of ways similar to Rutgers, where when they're executing, and especially on their offense, they can move the ball even against pretty good defenses. I think, if anything, Rutgers probably has more, quote, depth. I think the irony being that it's the same positions that Purdue and Rutgers have those guys, like, for example, wide receiver. I think Rutgers' top end guys are better, but Purdue has a lot of guys who have caught passes this year, where Rutgers is, even if we have a Michael Thomas or Ice Cup coming off the bench, they're not really featured very often, right? And so I think it does matter if Purdue's quarterback can play, because obviously it all starts with that. Some of their fans have said that he's a guy who's been carrying the team, but at the same time, one of their big plays against Minnesota was their backup quarterback, Singleton, who may get the start today, had a huge 50 or 60-yard touchdown run. So it's not that this is a guy who has never been in a game or has not played if Brown can't go. The last thing I'll say about him, just specifically before we get into actual game, is the best way for Rutgers fans to interpret this is think for those who have been around, when Rutgers had Giovanni Ricchigno start playing in 2016, where they put up some real nice offensive numbers and yardage totals against Indiana and Minnesota of that year. But then after Gio had hurt his hamstring running, he just wasn't the same guy, because defenses didn't have to worry that he was going to take off for a huge run. Now, Brown, I don't think, is as fast of a runner as Gio was, but I do think he's a better passer. And that dual threat ability, as I watched the last 3 weeks, Brown was running the option pretty well against Illinois, and then he started pretty good against Minnesota, but you could see he was starting to slow down. He took a big hit to his shoulder on a 2-point conversion attempt. And then in their last game, before he even got hurt last week against Northwestern, he was just not the same guy running the ball. He just didn't have the same energy. Potentially he's banged up. And so even if he plays, it's probably more likely that he's going to be the guy we saw the last week and a half versus the guy early in the season who was playing full-blown option, don't care about getting hurt, have a little bit of that extra bounce in his step than we saw. So again, for them, it does start with their quarterback. And I'm just not sure, even if he plays, what version we're going to get of quarterback Ryan Brown.
Yeah, those are excellent points. And of course, their quarterback, their backup is a mobile quarterback. How many times have we seen Rutgers have to deal with that? I guess my throwback to you is, in terms of knowing what we think of Brown and kind of how he's changed over the last few weeks with the wear and tear. Does that change the approach of the defense going into this game? And how do you think Rutgers should strategize from a defensive standpoint?
I think Purdue was coaches were saying they call the game the same way with both quarterbacks, which, if I look at their games from earlier in the year, that kind of makes sense, more or less. I mean, obviously they want Singleton to back up, take more hits in the run game, but both quarterbacks were equally adept at that. what I was trying to think about last night when I was pondering this is if Rutgers should really go in with 2 game plans depending on who starts, to your point. My initial thought is not really. Because even Brown, I think at times gets spooked by safeties. I think Singleton, the backup, really doesn't see backs that well. He does not look that comfortable in the pocket. So yeah, you don't want him to get outside, and you probably want to keep both of them in there because I think Brown is much better thrower on the run, and Singleton, if he gets out of the pocket, is going to run effectively. So I do think this is a game like we've talked about all season where you really want to try to keep them in the pocket. So it's probably roughly the same game plan, even if it's for different reasons as to why you're trying to keep that quarterback in the pocket, to answer your question.
In terms of the offense, obviously Rutgers needs to bounce back in a big way. There's some questions on whether Ian Strong will be fully available for this game. Ethan Kaliakmanis, I think, he's a very much confidence-oriented quarterback. It definitely seemed in that Oregon game, that he was pretty down just in terms of, and to your point, didn't have a lot of time. This offensive line, is starting to show some cracks there. I guess personally, I think it's really important for them to be very aggressive early on in this game. We've always talked about kind of the approach of the coaching staff and instilling confidence in this team. This team, obviously, it's a noon game. It's, I don't know what the crowd's going to be like at Purdue. But this team needs to bring energy in some way. And I think a fast start offensively is a way to do that. How do you look at this game in terms of an offensive standpoint for Rutgers?
I think that there's a lot of different ways that you can beat this Purdue defense. Again, they're pretty similar to Rutgers if I just run down basically what they are, which is they get very little pressure with their front four. One difference is I think their linebackers are a little savvier, a little faster, but actually a little smaller than Rutgers. In a sense, sometimes you're looking out there and you're like, are they playing with like 7 defensive backs? So their DBs and linebackers are a little small, but they're pretty fast for their positions. So a wide receiver like KJ Duff or Ian Strong can probably make some hay. On early downs, they tend to bail a lot. So they kind of play the defense we talk about over and over and over again, where a lot of times their linebackers will read run first. And then if there's not a run, then they just start bailing into random space, which causes 2 things. One, they don't necessarily see receivers. They're kind of just in areas rather than actual good zone coverage. But then sometimes you can undercut that with a guy and they're backpedaling, and then you can make a catch and run. So I think this is an opportunity for Sheffield. I think you could go any of those routes. Or I do think because they're undersized in the second and third levels, and some of the guys like try to tackle, like number 21, and I'm going to kind of sound like Shano here because I was looking at the numbers more than the names. Like number 21 tries to make tackles, but he's not very big or good. Number 25 just tries to pop the ball out. He just goes for turnovers. And number 1 is just which I think is a slot corner. He's a good cover guy, but he is atrocious at tackling. If you see him try and tackle you, just try to plow the guy over, because I almost feel bad because of how many guys just steamrolled him in the last few weeks. So there's also a path that you could try to go deep. You could try to throw those intermediate routes, or you could just try to put your foot down and just run straight ahead as much as you can, which even if Purdue is committed to the run, defensively, sometimes they can't stop it. So I imagine there's a lot of different ways you could go with this game plan. My concern is twofold. If Rutgers A goes with the game plan of just run up ahead and they're not just really wearing down Purdue, that could be problematic. Or sometimes when you have this many available ways to beat a defense, you kind of bounce back and forth. We've seen Mike Loxley's teams at Maryland do this a lot, where they kind of like have they're moving the ball, and then all of a sudden they have one drive where they're committed to, running short, and then it doesn't work. So then they completely flip, and now we're throwing deep. Okay, now that's not working. Okay, now we're going to flip to intermediate passing, and your offense gets all out of sorts, your quarterback's out of rhythm and stuff. So I hope that Rutgers can have a nice complementary game plan and doesn't panic or deviate from it, because, even with the struggles the Rutgers defense has had, Rutgers offense will have opportunities to make plays in this game. And it's incumbent on them to ensure they're moving the ball and, for lack of a better term, playing complementary football, because yes, there's an avenue where you could score as many points you can and win. There's also an avenue where you can kind of have this kind of in the muck kind of game where you could win. And there's just a lot of different paths to victory here. And I hope Rutgers is managing the different ways to do that well.
Yeah, well said. I think, my opinion, foot on the gas and don't take it off because the margin for error on defense is large and you can't rely on the defense in this game. And to your point, Purdue does have the ability to score points. This is very much, you could see this game in the high 30s, even low 40s shootout. And I hope that Rutgers has that type of mentality where they're just trying to maximize their drives as much as possible, worry less about time of possession, worry less about some of those factors. And I think, to your point about the defense for Purdue and the opportunities there, I do think Shiraka is pretty good at identifying matchups that can exploit weaknesses of its opponents. I think that's part of why they're successful early in games, especially in Big Ten play. But we have seen a trend where it gets to that mid-second quarter and things seem to stall. So again, is that taking the foot off the gas? Is that changing approach? Is that the other team's making adjustments? I think it's a combination of all of it. But I think in this game, this is a major opportunity for Rutgers. And of course, they're 2-0 lifetime against Purdue. But this is a huge, I think, fork in the road for this program for this season. And this is the type of win that, can certainly, I think, build some confidence in this team and the fan base. And a loss on the flip side, I think the wheels come completely off, and it's very hard to see them getting fixed before the end of this season. What kind of stock do you put into Schiano's comments this week about some changes made to the coaching staff, just in terms of responsibilities and things like that? I do find it a bit convenient that it comes in a game that's probably your most winnable on the schedule. But how much of an impact do you expect that to make? And I guess just the state of the coaching staff right now and kind of where they're at. How much do you think approach changes? How much do you think Schiano is, more involved or changing his approach? I guess your overall thoughts on kind of, obviously the importance going into this game and Schiano knowing that and kind of what you think to expect from his perspective.
I think that Mike Broadbent gave, a good synopsis of this on the night report, talking about how, personnel change at a few spots, that's fine. But most of the guys have already been playing. It's not like they have somebody on the bench who just is going to be a stalwart.
Right.
Corey Parrish, basically single-handedly won that game for Minnesota against Purdue. They don't have somebody like that can be that disruptive. I think that in terms of what you're doing on defense, regardless of who's calling plays, which obviously there's a good chance it's Schiano, I highly doubt, based on what other commentators are saying, that he's going to entrust Sparber in the biggest game in a while, in a sense, in terms of, how critical it is.
Must win, yep.
To just all of a sudden call plays for potentially the first time ever. That is, I'm not sure. Now, maybe he'll trust some, one of the things that no one has really talked about, but that is important part of it, is position coaches have more or less say as to who's going in the game. So it's possible they'll shift those dynamics that, if somebody's not doing a good, let's say it's linebacker, right? And, one of the troubles we saw last year, Rutgers playing guys who are banged up. Let's say Abram Wright tweaks his groin or quad or something on the first drive. Maybe they'll take more stock in, what Zach Sparber's linebackers coach is saying about, okay, is Shane Robinson ready to go? Is somebody else ready to go? Or do we need to keep Wright in there? That maybe the communication has changed with how much clout a position coach has in their rotation, or maybe less. It's possible that Schiano or Smith or whoever is taking less stock in that. Maybe that's one of the problems, which I doubt, because they pretty much have not subbed very often outside of the defensive front four. So there's that. I think just overall defensively, this is a game where you want to force the ball to certain spots, almost show hey, we're leaving your slot receiver open, throw it to him. We know he should get 5 yards if you throw an accurate ball and he catches it and he runs, for two reasons. One, I don't think Singleton, the backup, is that accurate if he has to throw the ball. And so even if it's at a game where he gets packages, even if Brown plays. So anytime he's in there, give him that, he might not even take it. And then 2, if you do that, then your defense is like got more emotion because they're like, okay, we're literally handing them this space, throw it there, and then everyone has to have a cavalry arrival and try to build that energy. Because I think one of the problems Rutgers has, if you really compare this to better Shannon defenses, is too much one-on-one tackling.
Yeah.
And so trying to force guys into spaces where there's multiple defenders is how this defense has to tackle, especially at the third level where they have really struggled. So to me, I think from a game plan standpoint, whoever's calling the signals, that's really what I want, especially because I think Purdue might try to run it more than they have in the past because they feel like their run game's pretty good. So there might be times where by almost not covering a slot receiver and cheating the slot corners or linebackers in, they might just run at you anyway. They might not take what you're giving. And so from that standpoint, I think that type of game plan works on all fronts. Now, how do they call it? Who's in charge? I don't know if that matters as much as actually having a good game plan. And it seemed like they were putting their heads together Sunday and Monday to spend extra time in the game planning than a normal week, which this is the time to do that. So to me, yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily see Sparber calling plays, but whether it's Smith or Schiano, I feel like more about is the game plan. Like, this is how we want to play these guys. They like to go a lot of trips left with a tight end to the right. Like, we need 2 or 3 different ways that we want to approach that. So our players know exactly what we're doing, and that on the Purdue sideline, they can't automatically check to a certain play or not because they know exactly how Rutgers is going to line up against a certain formation. The game plan this week is as critical as any game I can remember.
Yeah, excellent points. I was trying to look it up, but if they're not the worst, there's in terms of giving up big plays, explosive plays this year. Obviously, the defense has really struggled. You would think going into it, from a speed standpoint, Rutgers has been overmatched this year, but that should be hopefully less of a case in this game. But I think if how many times have we seen defenders get spun around? In plays, to your point about one-on-one tackling. It's going to be key, I think, obviously, especially if Purdue does try to manage the clock with the run game. For me, I think Rutgers has to respond offensively in terms of trying to have a pretty wide margin in winning the big play margin, explosive plays. That to me is the clear path to victory for this team. I don't think you want to get into this isn't a 16-13 type game you want to win. You want to win this going away. You want to win this scoring as many points as possible. No matter how Purdue, this is kind of to our point a couple of weeks ago about, Kansas State's approach in the bowl game. And typically it's like, it doesn't matter what Purdue's doing. You have to maximize your strengths and exploit those. And I think for this offense, they have the opportunity to do that. And then defensively, you try to hold your own. But I think, honestly, if Purdue is trying to grind it, it almost works to Rutgers' advantage because I think, it would be a little bit, even if they're, have had struggles executing, Rutgers is very vulnerable to big plays and explosive plays. So I'm curious to see Purdue's approach on how they attack the defense. And to your point, I agree. I think game planning is so important. And I'm sure Schiano is as involved as ever. But I think, in terms of what edge do they have in this game? We saw that they actually did a decent job of takeaways against Oregon, but to your context from previous weeks, I mean, that margin doesn't always, live out to having an impact on the game. Red zone defense is obviously going to be huge in this game and execution on the offensive side. Rutgers has really struggled on third down conversions on offense lately. So all of these things matter. But I think from a confidence standpoint, from an energy standpoint, I think we'll know pretty early on how Rutgers is approaching this game. And I think that everyone in that building knows how important this game is. And I think that actually works to their advantage to have that type of urgency. And again, to the credit of Schiano and in the past, last year, I mean, how many times have we said, their backs were against the wall. And we weren't too confident that they were going to be able to respond, and they ultimately did. So We're back here again. Any final thoughts on this matchup heading into Saturday noon against Purdue?
I think to your point, if this comes down to which team is going to execute better on third down and in the red zone offensively, that is not good for Rutgers.
Agreed.
This is the type of game where they got to win by 14 points. And as we've talked about with the math, a lot of times when you're up by 14, the other team has to go for it on fourth down, even when they could normally just kick a field goal. All those type of things happen when you're up by 2 scores. We saw that not to be the case against Iowa, not to be the case against Minnesota, where it was too tight of a game. Mm-hmm. And so Rutgers, this is especially going on the road. It's 11 a.m. kick in. I'm trying to remember because Indiana is kind of weird, quirky with daylight savings time. But regardless, Rutgers body clock should be on a slightly hour ahead. So they, in theory, should be able to come out firing as the road team early on, try to punch them in the mouth early. And even simple things like screens, like the Purdue defense is really susceptible to screens because like Rutgers, they're in the front four, doesn't get pressure. So if they see a free path to the quarterback, their eyes get wide open. And then like everyone's running in the backfield when it's an obvious screen. And then Rutgers has like bigger receivers, like, and blocking these smaller defensive backs, like those type of plays could be huge. I mean, Purdue doesn't set the edge right. So there's plenty of times where, Antoine Raymond could literally just run like towards the butt of his right tackle, especially, and Taj White. And White might not even have to do very much to keep the guy off the line. So I think there's a lot of those runs, like maybe straight up the middle is not the best. They got a nice guy at defensive tackle, but same with Rutgers. Like teams do everything other than run straight ahead. And so I think to capitalize on that momentum and potential energy, or even to give your players a little bit of energy, those are some of the type of plays where I think Rutgers needs to do on both sides of the ball. Defensively, almost give them a place to move and then just swarm and kind of energy like kind of builds on itself among your defense. And then offensively, hopefully they can run some plays that, not just drop back really far. If you're going to drop back and throw a bomb, that's fine. There's some emotion to that, but it's not the same as the physical high you get from crushing a guy and even getting a 7-yard run on first down.
Yeah.
Whether it be a screen play or a power run. Again, Rutgers can't just go Sam Brown 2022, run it into the line and think they're going to win. But if they can just keep the defense off balance enough with passes on first down, I think they're going to pop a lot of runs, and then they're going to start getting the confidence back that you said they've kind of lost over the last few weeks. And then again, on special teams, I mean, you got to bring the energy there because Purdue has a pretty skilled special teams unit, but they're not physically imposing. And so if you let them punch you in the mouth, that's not going to go well. You have to be the aggressor on the special team side. And again, we've seen Schiano in the past bring teams. The only time we didn't see him do it was 2010 when you obviously had Eric Legrand's injury. But every other time, every other season, there's been a game where we expected Rutgers to be rolling over and dying under Schiano later in the season, and they have just out of nowhere just brought the energy, and that's what we need to see in this game. And if they do that, they will win. If they play even good, they will win this game.
Totally agree. I do think DT Sheffield is a huge X factor in this game. Is this the game that he truly breaks out? I think Rutgers can use him in a variety of ways and really be effective with his speed in this game, to your point. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, I'm really – it's twofold, right? They obviously need to win this game, but I think also approach and just the mindset of this team is really going to tell us a lot, especially early on in this game. Obviously, they need to minimize mistakes, but I think less so worry about making mistakes and more so just, to your point, punch them in the mouth early and don't stop. And I think that's the kind of grinded out mentality we need to see in this game. And hopefully we're happy and we see a win and it's 4-4 and we start dreaming of, okay, well, you got, Maryland still, you got Illinois, which is a good team, but not a great team. And I think talent wise, Rutgers isn't that far below and has a chance. And maybe they pull another late season rabbit out of the hat and they can find bowl eligibility where I think a loss in this game can really just derail the rest of the season and be very difficult for this staff to, have this team bounce back. And obviously I think potentially lose the fan base as well. So this game is not about NIL. I don't want to hear about it in this game. This is all about coaching, execution, and players stepping up when it matters most. So we'll see what happens. Thanks so much, David Anderson, for being back. and for you listening and watching once again here at the Scarlet Faithful podcast.
Go Knights.